today is resilience, and the other part is learning capacity. And we're going to talk about the effect of resilience on learning capacity and vice versa. I'm also going to spend quite a bit of time to talk to you about the context of resilience. And then we're also going to spend a bit of time to understand why upskilling is so important, not only because of the rapid evolving world in terms of technology, and that we are most likely, we have no idea what kind of jobs we're going to have in the near future, and therefore we need a critical minimum amount of skill sets so that we can most likely just fit into new jobs and learn as we go along and upskill, and not only reskill but also upskill in the world. And I'm going to talk about that, but also I'm going to talk about why that is so important to build resilience, so that we do not burn out and that we remain high-performing individuals in this rapidly evolving world. Just on that note, I just want to re-emphasize from a neurobiological perspective, from a neurological perspective. I had a number of conversations. And this is, of course, anecdotal. There are no case studies that I can show you, but there are a number of conversations with a number of senior individuals working with young professionals in the last week in South Africa. And it is just alarming, the empirical case studies that are now just being basically shared with so many millennials, young professionals who are showing signs of burnout. And it's really, I think this is something we have to take very seriously. So burnout is rife. Resilience is essential. It is imperative. And therefore, it is worthwhile to really pay attention to this. From the neurological perspective, or the neuroscientific perspective of Neurozone, I'm Etienne from Walt, I'm a neurologist and come from the clinical perspective. Neurozone really looks at the brain-body system and the behavioral code of the resilience, and the behavioral code for learning capacity, the behavioral code for high performance as such, because these all form components of, or dimensions of the high-performing individual, always within the group context. And so we're going to really spend time from that perspective today. And so let me then fire away, having shared this introduction with you, just once again, as I say, emphasizing the most important, the real importance of resilience as an entity, and also learning capacity within that context. Let me share a screen with you. That's the way we do it. Yeah, and I'm going to probably repeat a number of things again for some of you who have been on these master classes in the past, because we need to talk about resilience. But for those of you who have been in previous master classes where we talked about resilience, please bear with me. I really want to share this with anybody who is new on and hasn't really gone through this with us in the past. So a little bit of repetition. The first important context, once again, for all of us when we think about you and I as a brain-body system, is this axis that I now use very frequently and feel that it really has a great value. Here in top, you see this comes from a field called psychoneuroimmunology. It speaks to the way that you and I think, that our brains operate, so the way we internalize external information, the way our brains work with that information, and also then within the internal and external context to find an equilibrium and ensure that you and I stay alive, survive, and thrive in life. And through that process, the moment there is an imbalance, the brain-body system tends to try to correct it, and often it does it through this immunological processes, the so-called immunological system. And if it doesn't go well, the external environment provides challenges that you seemingly cannot overcome, and you will remain in a so-called state of chronic stress down here in the red zone, and this will lead to a pro-inflammatory state. Real inflammation in the body, which affects those parts of your body which are genetically prone and more susceptible for chronic disease. And you are then likely to develop your chronic disease life, or develop it while you could have outlived it without actually having contracted the condition at all. Therefore, it is really important from a clinical perspective to understand that information that we internalize, the way we behave, the way we internalize that information, the lenses that we have in front of our eyes, information, and the way we assign value to that information has a profound effect on the way that the brain-body system really responds and reacts to ensure that from that perspective, you and I stay alive, survive, and thrive in life. And so it all starts with these lenses and mindset, and at the same time, the interaction between you and me and us, team and an organization, all of those interactions also have a very profound effect on your individual brain-body system and mind. And so we know that, for example, optimism is contagious. Negative intrusive thought patterns are contagious. They affect us. And so that kind of, and even chronic stress, there's contagious components for that. So I live with somebody who's stressed, I also internalizes that, and then also could become a similar being in that sense. And actually my system can change. So it's very important to understand how you and I as a brain-body system and as an organism function. It's incredibly important when you think about organizational performance. Why? Well, I know that you will agree with me that until not so long ago, we didn't really think about ourselves as a brain-body system going to work and performing in a boardroom and being exercising leadership and performing within the context of a work environment. You almost felt like it's a bit like you leave your brain-body system outside of the door, go in and work, and then you hop back into the brain-body system, into the gym, and now I'm going to work my body and my brain and everything else. And that's just not the way it works, right? It's simply incredibly important to understand and really appreciate that this system that I'm actually showing in this slide, that this system always lives somewhere along this axis at work and at home. And the question is, where along this axis are you and I, and to what extent do we as leaders understand, and as coaches and as human capital professionals understand these concepts, so that we can actually really ensure that we are up here in the green. And so just to that point, this is where you want to be as an individual. You want to prevent dysfunction by being in a baseline relaxed physiological state, and to ensure that you do not implode in the face and the onslaught of this rapidly evolving world, where so many cues are actually requiring attention, demanding attention, and many of these cues are quite, in our perception, are quite threatening. They don't go away, and continuously there's this accumulation and so-called allostatic load, a load that is just continuously building up. And the question is, can we actually withstand all of that and not implode through chronic stress, develop our anxiety and hyperventilation syndrome, and eventually implosion? And the answer is, yes, we can. And the way that we do that is by building our resilience. And so resilience in that sense is the buffer. It is the essential neurobiological structure that ensures that we are set up for high performance. And this is just a revision of the way that this axis works. And so resilience in itself is an innate property of the whole brain-body system. For example, I usually use this very simple example to describe resilience. If I exercise my bicep with a dumbbell, the dumbbell is heavy initially, and so it's hard work. I overcome the challenge, and in time, I will actually be able to overcome heavier dumbbells, and the weight becomes heavier and I become stronger. Why? Because I've learned from the experience, and through that experience, I grew a muscle that makes me stronger. And so I become more resilient, and therefore I can overcome the dumbbell easier, and I can actually withstand a much more profound adverse event. This is an example of the resilient building of a particular piece of the body, and you name a muscle. But in the same fashion, you and I, the whole brain-body system, is ready to respond to incoming cues. And once that incoming cue is received, the system judges that particular incoming cue, and there's a value assigned to it. It tags a value for importance in terms of how important is this, can I overcome it, and what do I need to overcome this And so, yes, I can. I'm optimistic. I believe I overcome the challenge. Then I assign a certain amount of energy, and also through innovation, overcome the problem with problem solving, and then the system relaxes again. And this is exactly what happens, the resilient system at work. Once it overcame the challenge, it learned from it and it adapts. And so this is actually at the core of resilience. You and I are complex, adaptive organisms. It's really important to understand that we are complex, adaptive organisms. And the way that we adapt and continue to thrive in life is through resilience, through a process of complex problem solving, using our prior knowledge and overcoming the particular challenge that comes our way. So you can see that knowledge, innovation, problem solving, the energy that we assign, the thrust of energy, the so-called goal-directed system, and then, of course, the overcoming of the challenge, then the relaxed physiological state back into that baseline state, are all part of the resilient, complex, adaptive organism. And of course, when we talk about adaptive, you have to think about this idea that is so true today, right? That in a rapidly evolving world, we have to be agile and adaptive. Now, yes, we have to be adaptive. We are adaptive organisms. We just have to enhance that adaptivity. And so agility and adaptivity are incredibly important dimensions of resilience and of a resilient organism. I think I've said enough along this particular line. And so let's just for a moment revisit resilience. It's the capacity of the brain-body system to prevent implosion in the presence of a severe or prolonged stress factor. You also bounce back after the stress has subsided. But at this point, this could be an inert material. But the wonderful thing about a complex, adaptive, living organism is that we grow through stressful events to prepare the brain-body system for new and even unrelated stresses. That's incredible. Because you're so complex, you've developed capacity to overcome even unrelated stressors, although the most important is still for what you've learned, of course, through this experience. Just to remind you that homeostasis in the medical term or in physiology says that what goes in must go out. So water comes in through what we ingest, and it goes out through our breathing, our sweating, and through urine, through our bladders. And the balance is the same. What goes in, goes out. That is homeostasis. There's a static, everything is stable. Not so with the elements that enable us to learn. And so effectively, we are all about allostasis. And remember, allostasis looks a bit like this. This is the very complex or technical little drawing, but let me just remind you that homeostasis on the left says there is a set point that says I have to have so much water in my system. I know what that set point is. It's about what it is, 75 to 80% of my system consists of water. It's got to be there. And then there is a process, for example, the water comes in, the information is sent to the set point. The effector is the kidney says, hey, we've got to get rid of a lot of this water. We get rid of it, and it goes out through the bladder, and we actually always approximate the set point. That's homeostasis. You can see the same thing happens here because you bounce back to where you were before. But you also grow by doing what? By actually enhancing this capacity of knowledge and prediction. And allostasis says that I have prior knowledge about a particular condition. For example, I know how heavy this dumbbell is, so I can actually overcome it. I predict how I'm going to overcome that, and I just perform the action, and through that I learn, and therefore I grow from that experience, and I become better at what I'm doing. And this is the allostatic process. I hope this makes sense. This is going to take us right into learning capacity. So let's talk about learning. Let's talk about knowledge. Let's talk about learning capacity for a while, and then we're going to put everything together. The first important thing that I want to mention is don't forget this particular, if you may use a descriptive definition of what we do in business. Business is not really anything else but a very complex way that we have now, that we aggregate together to assign energy to tasks for resource allocation. And in fact, that's what we do. We use our skills and knowledge to allocate resources together, and then we distribute these resources fairly. That's what we have to do, right? In order to stay alive, survive, and thrive in life. So you can see I've bolded out this skills and knowledge because it really is what we use. We use knowledge, skills, expertise, prior memory, etc., etc. We use all of that. That is what we use to innovate with, to solve problems with. And can you see that there's the prior knowledge, there's the prediction, and then the action, and then we stay alive, survive, and thrive. Can you see that in the definition of business to the brain, resilience is actually in there? And it is a continuous living process. Therefore, you and I in business are not dead organizations. We are living organizations called organisms who uses this resilience capacity as complex adaptive organisms to continuously stay ahead of the curve. And of course, in a rapidly evolving world, we need so much more of this, and we need to collaborate so well because on my own, I am ineffective in a rapidly evolving world. And that's why we need collaboration and empathy and capacity to stick together and great leadership to use all these resources collectively so that we can, at a lower energy, get a high yield, low energy input, high yield, and enhance our capacity to stay alive, survive, and thrive in life. And so skills and knowledge are innate and deeply part of us. Therefore, I really want to understand two things. One is I need to have a great learning capacity. The brain's capacity for learning needs to be optimized. Therefore, it is so important. You can see within the resilience and within the way we do business, learning capacity is a core competence. It's one of the core capacities, as is innovation capacity, and of course, the self-leadership and resilience. But they're all part of the high-performance capacity of an individual brain-body system. So we have to enhance our skills and knowledge and build learning capacity. But that's only one part of learning, if you want to think about learning and learning capacity in context of resilience. And I'm going to try to make a clear demarcation between these two, the distinction between these two forms of learning. And so let's first just think about learning as the physiological entity. How do we learn things? And I thought I'm just going to share a few things with you from a neuroscientific perspective again. What you see here is a little snapshot of a 3D model that we use in our certification course and often in learning. So the idea is that you see the brain sort of from the back and the side. That's the front there, and there's the brain stem. This is the cerebellum, and you see these interesting structures here. These blocks, of course, do not belong to the brain, but they refer to the long-term memory sites. And these sites actually also belong to the same primary sensory areas. So, for example, the primary sensory area in the brain that receives any tactile information is here where the knowledge of touch is also stored. For example, if I think about the way that an apple feels, I have a knowledge of that because I have prior knowledge, and the prior knowledge of the sensation of the apple, the skin of the apple, is actually also in here, around the area of touch with which I actually picked up that information. And hearing is here, and this is where vision is. Vision at the back of the head, hearing towards the side, and then touch here at the top. And so all these long-term memory sites are connected to the hippocampus. And these are, you see that hippocampus there, there's a structure, the bag of peas. There are two, one on the right side here, and one on the other side, the left side. And the information that comes into this, into your system when you learn new things and you experience new experiences, that information goes into your system through your attention structures, and you pay attention to the information that you've received by this part of the brain, the hippocampus, and that information is now shipped out. It is almost like ships in the night. It sails off to these different long-term memory sites, and you start to consolidate knowledge. How do I consolidate that knowledge? Well, if the information is not that important to me or that interesting, I can consolidate that knowledge by means of a very high energy input, and that is repetition, right? But if I find this very interesting and I find that I can actually associate with this information, the hooks almost ensures that I learn quicker and easier. The information that is learned with the lowest energy input, new knowledge, are the very emotionally laden knowledge that are emotionally important. For example, where were you when the Twin Towers fell? For an example. Or where were you when somebody who's so dear to you left you? Or died. And so I have experience of all of these, and I know exactly where I was and what I was doing when this happened. This information is instantaneously consolidated and instantly laid down permanently, and then it's consolidated, of course, over time, but I have it available right from the moment that I experienced. And that goes through the amygdalas, these little almonds, and it's part of the emotional brain. It's interesting. So it's a different type of memory, but it's extremely important and relevant. Now, how do I know that that information is relevant? It's because my brain has a prior memory set of and a knowledge and a value assignment of what is important. And because of that mindset and my belief system and my understanding of the world, that map determines how important information is. And therefore, it also determines how much energy will have to be assigned to new knowledge. You get the point, right? It means that mindset has got something to do with learning, and learning has something to do with resilience, and so forth. So mindset is so important for resilience in that sense. But I'll get back to that one. I first just want to talk about learning capacity. How do I learn new information so that I can be innovative with that information and with that knowledge? And of course, I build in this new information based on what my system is actually used to using. It's a very sensible system, right? So I can use what is important for me in my life at the moment. Right, so this is just a few things on the way that information is received. It is then memory is consolidated in these long-term memory sites. And of course, once it is consolidated in these memory sites, this problem-solving machine, this long so-called dorsolateral pathways, the superhighways of the brain in front here, can make use of that information, and then it piecemeal this building blocks for innovation together to form a realistic scenario of the possible, which effectively is problem solving. So, what are we saying? We're saying that innovation capacity is very dependent on your prior knowledge, on your knowledge of the properties, understanding the properties of a construct or the concept that you have to deal with when you have a problem. The more you know about this particular concept or this experience, the better you can solve the problem that is actually put in front of you. That is just a simple, important rule, which means that learning capacity in itself gives you higher prior knowledge, and higher prior knowledge enhances your resilience capacity. Remember that. So more prior knowledge you have, the better you are at predicting what's coming, and the better you can assign energy to the task in the right way to solve the problem, and so overcome the challenge, and that completes the resilience process, if you may, allostasis, the capacity of bouncing back and overcoming the challenge. Right, I'm just going to stop there for a second and just remind myself that this kind of learning capacity is capacity that builds knowledge. All right, that's very important. It is not the one, it's a bit different from how we learn through a adverse event, because that gives us continuous learning so we can actually grow through what we have learned. So there's two different things here. One is going to do with mindset, and the other one's going to do with my capacity for learning. So there's capacity for learning, and there's also what will you be learning, right? And what I will be learning is determined by the map that's in my brain. And the other one of how much I can learn of what I will be learning is determined by my learning capacity. So I think it's important to understand the difference between the two. And if you think about upskilling as well, we upskill ourselves with new knowledge, skills, expertise in time, based on what we deem to be important, and then learning capacity determines how well I am actually ready to receive information, fertile soil, capacity for actually building memory and consolidating the memory in these long-term memory sites. Are these two separate entities? In our minds, yes. Well, in the idea is that it's separate, right? But they're not separate. They are actually also very much interrelated. And we're going to get back to that in a second. When you think about learning capacity, let's continue a little bit down the line of learning capacity. I just want to remind you that learning is a physical process. And I've now gone into this blue, back to this blue blob, this beautiful blue structure called the hippocampus, like a bag of peas, but I've gone into that now. And I've actually gone into this and looked at the neural circuits within the hippocampus. This is the area that we learn with. What you have to see here is that you see the neurons, these blue neurons, the brain cells, they are connected, and they form numbers of connections, and each of these, of course, can form about 10,000 connections with other brain cells. And then you can see that they're also myelinated. They've got these yellow sheaths around them, and this little construct is called a glial cell, a supporting cell. These little important molecules, the serial pieces here, are secreted by these neurons, and in response to the good things that you and I do to our hippocampus. So if you practice high-intensity interval training, you practice mindfulness, if you sleep well between 7 and 9 hours a night, those kind of things are, and intermittent fasting has also got a value here. They will enhance the secretion of these growth factors, which will enhance the capacity of your hippocampus to build more circuits. You can actually grow new brain cells, you can grow stronger connections, and you can strengthen these connections. So that means that your learning capacity is enhanced. And so if you want to enhance your learning capacity of your brain, you must say, what are the things that I can do to enhance the growth factors in my hippocampus, and what do I have to do to reduce, what do I have to reduce and to stamp out of my life that will reduce the secretion of these growth factors. And the one thing that reduces the secretion of these growth factors is chronic stress. Chronic stress, prolonged anxiety, it reduces the growth factors, and it starts to diminish the connections. Some of the brain cells wither away, and eventually you don't have a great learning capacity. So learning, remembering is reduced, and in the amygdalas, those eyes of the monsters, those areas, the seat of emotion now becomes overactive. And so you are very anxious, make snapshot decisions, you can't really remember well, and in time you are overwhelmed and implode. And so this is a very good example of what physically happens in your brain and what needs to be happening if you want to build learning capacity. You have to be in a baseline relaxed physiological state, no chronic stress. This is the ideal state, right? No chronic stress. Then you have to look after your system through these components that I've mentioned. And it's interesting that there are also a number of components that I actually know that we now found when we look at the way that we behave that are even more important than these growth factors. And so we see that the behaviors that really help you to ensure that your learning capacity is high, including these growth factors, are very interesting, got to do with the way that you actually focus. And I'll explain how that works, because that also actually is dependent on what you do in the foundation. I'm going to explain that when I get to that. But the most important thing is to understand that learning capacity is a physical construct. It works physically in the brain. The next, and so it's physical, and by the way, just if you look at this, the memory sites in this brain, if you're looking from the right side, that's the long-term memory site area for vision, that's the one for hearing, that's for touch. Just to remind you, it's all in the back here. We use this information piecemeal together with this problem-solving machine to innovate and to enhance our resilience capacity, to overcome our challenges and to grow through that. So simply important components when we think of learning. The first one is actually that we just worked through now, was actually number 2 here. It's learning capacity provides building blocks for innovation, which enhances resilience. The second one that I'm going to deal with, which I've put in here as the number 1, is this idea of what we learn is determined by our mindset, and that affects our resilience. Simply put, that if you and I experience anything, we sense that information from the external environment. It is sent through a filter, which is called mindset. And through that filter or the lens, the information is received within our own systems, and we actually then act accordingly. So what actually happens physically? Physically, this lens, if you may, the lens is almost like a map in the brain. It's a map that says, these are the things that are really important in my life, and these are less important. And this is of no consequence. And the way that we assign values to incoming cues always is more a threat response, and then there's a reward response. This is 4 to 6 times as readily and active as the reward responses. But this mindset, these set of values, forms a map along which we guide ourselves through life unconsciously. And that also determines what we learn at night, because that mindset map tells me that these things are more important than those things. And so at night, when I learn new information, I actually extract the information from the previous day that are deemed to be more important than others. And so my current mindset continues actually through this continuous spiral continues to learn those things that are important for the mindset and consolidate it along this particular mindset. At the same time, that mindset that I work with when I have to overcome a challenge determines how big is this problem, how much energy can I assign to this, can I overcome this problem or not, etc., etc. And that mindset can even can be changed by prior knowledge, but even with prior experiences that could be bad for me. That mindset could determine that I can simply not see myself overcoming the challenges. No wonder that optimism and reducing negative thought patterns, destructive thoughts in our brain, are the two top behaviors that we have to work on when we want to build resilience. And those have got a lot to do with mindset. So I'm going to once again say that what we learn is determined by our mindset, and that affects resilience. And so let me just for a moment talk about mindset. This is just a simplified way of looking at how we assign values. So I've just put worldview, mindset. I can put belief system in here. They are not exactly the same, right? But they have got almost like overlapping elements that says this is how I assign the kind of values I assign to incoming cues. My mindset determines that worldview, belief system that provides the context of whatever comes in. The next things I assign that a value to that information and interpret it for content, and then my system makes a decision to respond based on that value assignment. So for some people, some things can be extremely fearful. So some people drinking a bit of water, if this water has not gone over 7 stones or pebbles, I will probably not drink it because I assign a huge value to, or there's a major threat in my mind that there could be all kinds of disease in there. For others, they would not even drink this from the tap because there might be all kinds of toxins in there. And so you can see that the value that we assign to an incoming cue determines what my actions. Unconsciously, eventually, I have a certain way of actually responding to this because of the value that I assign. And in the same way, for very complex matters. I mean, this is a simple matter, right? It's complicated, but it's not complex. But once you have a complex, living, relational aspects to life, it becomes very complex and difficult. But it still happens in our brain with our incredible multimodal capacity of the brain. You assign these values, and that determines your emotion. Now, emotion is not feeling. Remember that it's actually not feeling. Feeling is anger, disgust, fear, joy, etc. But emotion is a deep response that is devoid of feeling. It's a response to this particular incoming cue to say, this is how dangerous it is. I will avoid it. I will either run away from it or move away from it or avoid it, or I will actually overcome it. Oh, this is good for me. I'm going to use it. And that leads to a particular feeling. And that's why emotion is not the same as feeling. There can be feeling or thought, and that could lead to action. But if the emotional response is of extreme high importance, I will action through my emotion, move to action without even having a feeling and thought. There's no time for that. For example, if I see a snake or a lion, there will be action. And so my feeling and thought will be secondary. And this can lead to a feeling and thought, which will again lead to action and so forth. Can you see that choice? The conscious bit is only here at the bottom. This is all unconscious. All the blue is unconscious. And this is why we say mindset drives actions. Now, if you've got a certain mindset around life, and around, for example, that if you have a fixed mindset, that my mistakes are going to be massive. I cannot afford to make a mistake. I'm individually competitive. I come from an individualistic background, and mistakes are just massive. I become a serious self-critic, and every time I make a mistake, I feel as if I failed. That's become negative intrusive thought patterns. You can see where this leads to. That mindset that I as an individual have to overcome things is a mindset that is a massive problem today. It reduces my capacity for iteration, for design thinking, for making mistakes fairly quickly and to iterate from those mistakes. And the way to overcome that particular mindset that reduces my agility and my adaptiveness as a complex adaptive organism and reduces my resilience, which leads to chronic stress and implosion. You get that, right? I'm actually talking to myself here. I'm fascinated by the way that it works, right? If you want to prevent that, the best type of mindset that I need when it comes to that particular problem is to understand that collaborative competitiveness leads to a higher yield for me individually. So there's a higher yield for the energy that I assign if I have collaboration, not only for the group, but also for me as an individual. There's more for all of us. And therefore, we will do that. We actually assign, we work and collaborate together. We then are able to make mistakes quick, also understand that these mistakes, of course, are not going to kill someone. I mean, I'm not talking about devastating consequences of mistakes. For that, of course, there is no tolerance. But I'm sure you appreciate that too. Design thinking is all about, and resilience is all about really embracing mistakes, collaborating together, iterating very quickly, and actually making less mistakes eventually, and then you come up with a better solution for the problem, which once again enhances resilience. And so the mindset enhances that resilience capacity. If I have a mindset for collaborative, competitive collaboration. Maybe just one more thing that I wanted to show you. This is just a little interesting way of understanding how the brain grows. This is just how the brain builds new brain cells. Can you see that as you do the right things to your hippocampus? And chronic stress leads to this, right? Just the way that it works. So let's just build ourselves. This is we're out of chronic stress and we're doing well. And so what we learn is determined by our mindset and affects resilience. Here you see the failure issue, how to understand it, learn from it, recover from it. Harvard Business Review paid attention to this big time. And it speaks once again to this idea of the mindset of an individual competitive mindset and our fear for failure. I don't have to say any more about this. This will reduce resilience significantly. And then the next form of learning is learning capacity that enhances, provides the building blocks for innovation, which enhances resilience, again, creating value from knowledge. Creating value from knowledge, a resilience-based strategy toolkit. So this speaks to the capacity of knowledge that we build and the learning capacity that is enhanced, and more knowledge, giving me more prior knowledge, enhances my capacity for problem solving, which builds resilience. So a resilient mindset and resilience enhances my capacity for learning and vice versa. They are completely interconnected. It has profound implications for upskilling. And if you think about it, this is where you and I are going in life at a rapid pace. And I hope that you don't feel that you are doing this at such a rapid pace. With mindfulness and being in a baseline relaxed physiological state, and being able to really pay attention to the most important things and reduce your attention to those that are actually in blocker, those that are less important, ensuring that your wellness rhythms are in place, will probably make you do the same, but you will just feel that it's a breather, it's easier. It's a life full of surprises and of new learning and of great rewards. And so this is how we actually have to do life today. It's a rapidly evolving world. We have to continue to learn. We have to upskill ourselves. Upskilling, therefore, if you think about the prior knowledge as a component, learning as an important component of resilience. Upskilling does not only ensure that you and I have a job going forward, or that the world will continue to be able to make meaningful contributions through so-called jobs in the future, maybe with different names and different types of content. But the other thing you have to remember is that upskilling in itself is essential. In terms of prior knowledge, is essential for resilience, to ensure that we do not implode in this rapidly evolving world, to ensure that the brain-body systems remain well and are set up for high performance. And so once again, there's this effect, a spiraling effect. Upskilling in itself, therefore, essential for resilience and vice versa. And once I'm resilient, this will, of course, lead to a higher learning capacity, build my learning capacity, prevent chronic stress, build the learning capacity, and the learning capacity then ensures that I learn quicker and faster and become more innovative. You can see the spiral going up. So the brain-body system, everything affects everything. For those of you who've been at these master courses and gone through the Neurozone certification course, you know this very well. You've seen this many times. We have a fascinating brain. The human brain is just the most fascinating organ and field of knowledge that I've ever come across. And by and large, if you think about the brainstem as a basic but incredibly complex system, but important to stay alive, it all works through rhythms and cycles. Wellness rhythms, so important. The emotional backbone, the emotional system, the limbic system, looking after us by assigning the value to the incoming cues and then goal-directedly move us through the safe space using the mindset that you and I have, the worldview, the belief system. And of course, therefore, it's important to really have a optimized mindset and worldview and belief system. Continue to think about that for a while. We're not going to become too philosophical or political about that. And then we have the problem-solving machine that then works basically supported by these wellness rhythms and the emotional backbone of social safety and using the collective and harnessing our collaborative capacity for problem solving. And so that's just the brain-body system affecting everything. You remember that there's this model of brain performance. We now talk about high-performance index here. The optimized brain-body system now became a high-performance index, and there you see resilience. There you see learning capacity. You see self-leadership, and you see innovation capacity. We spoke about how these are all interrelated to provide us with an optimized brain-body system and a high-performance index. And these drivers in the outer circle then contribute differentially and collectively to these capacities that you and I so dearly need to not implode, to perform at our best, and to learn well and to upskill in this rapidly evolving world. And so worthwhile to understand what in these different drivers are the components that really have a great effect on these different capacities. And so to that extent, we've now been working very meticulously on this behavioral code of brain performance. We just take all these behaviors within the drivers and pivot them around a particular core capacity. For example, resilience, there you see resilience. Resilience, we take all these behaviors in here and we just put them all together, clump them together, and you can see that there's a code from very, very valued and important to less important. You can't read this, I can't read this. It's just an impression that these 68 are all pivoting around resilience. I mean, number one, there is optimism. And this has been done with 2,500 leaders in South Africa and the US, and we've developed a template to understand what is the code for high performance. This is the code for resilience. And so just to remind you that we're still looking at this study. I once again took this study of 2,500 leaders, mostly South Africa and USA. We looked at a number of them, classified them within these different categories. There was the job levels. There were this education department, company, the industry, and excuse me, I'm actually just confusing myself here. Let me just see what I'm doing here. So basically what we've done is we looked at the different demographics and also looked at which kind of company industry had what kind of, at the lowest and the highest resilience and clinic visits, et cetera, et cetera. And for a moment, if you forgive me, I'm going to go past this and just look at this one for you because this is easy to understand. Strongest and most vulnerable departments across 16 industries. You can see that the learning capacity, those ones who had the best learning capacity was finance, with the worst learning capacity was marketing, sales, and IT. Isn't that interesting? Self-leadership, the best ones were human resources, the worst self-leadership IT, the worst resilience IT, the best resilience human resources. We talked about this in the previous masterclass as to how intricately related self-leadership and resilience are. The amount of energy we assign and how we assign the right energy to the right tasks to have a high yield for the energy that we assign the self-leadership component, and resilience, once again, to understand how to make the right predictions, use the right amount of knowledge to overcome the challenge. You can imagine it's very closely related, and it also is in terms of the way we look at this. So they are very much intertwined and almost extrapolated on each other, and also just almost mirrored on each other. When you look at innovation capacity, that's where the R&D comes in as the top, the worst with finance. Interesting that the learning capacity of finance was best, but the innovation capacity was the worst. This, for example, speaks to something that's happening in the abstraction capacity. That is something where this finance group have to look at. And we can we can potentially look at these things. I just don't have the analytics for you now to explain why this is the case. But you can see that turnover intentions, the best, lowest, for example, of turnover intentions, once again, marketing and sales. They also, worst was research and development, IT. So once again, if you are low on your self-leadership and resilience, your turnover intention is actually quite high, your intention is high, the risk is high, job performance, and so on and so forth. I'm actually just going to focus a bit on the self-leadership component here. The best the learning capacity. The best learning capacity was finance. The worst was marketing and sales and IT. And you can then see that there is IT and there's IT. So some resemblance or some correlation between resilience and learning capacity, but there are also distinct differences. And that's something that we find interesting. If you look, for example, at the behavioral code, these are the behavioral code components that we saw have got the strongest correlation and also causative effect on learning capacity. In fact, they are bigger in the study. They were bigger than, for example, the high intensity interval training, the fasting, the mindfulness that we recommend so strongly. Or would recommend so strongly because we know that the science shows us that this has an effect on the growth factors. But remember that what is studied here are certain behaviors and certain states. For example, curiosity is a state, diversity in your team is a particular condition, trust in your personal life is a state, brain games difficulty, it's the difficulty of if you do brain training games and you play difficult ones at a high level, and if you reduce involuntary daydreaming. So this all speaks to focus and attention in the executive function system. It speaks to enhancing the working memory capacity. Your system is able to focus better, and this seems to have a great effect on learning capacity. We also know, though, that mindfulness training enhances also enhances the executive function system. But by far, those things that you really want to be sure that you want to have in place is you want to have reduce involuntary daydreaming because it's so devastating, destructive. And the second one is if you do play brain training games, you can just continue to enhance the difficulty. I mean, me looking at this says, hey, man, this is very compelling. If you think about 2,500 people being studied through a regression analysis system, there's got to be something there, and therefore I might just pull out my Posit Science, my Brain HQ, or my Cognifit, and start to just continue to enhance the difficulty of that to ensure that I build my learning capacity. Curiosity speaks for itself. The diversity of team, interesting enough. Remember that this leads to allostasis and reduced a relaxed physiological state in organizations if you have a great diversity of team and good functioning, which sets you up for learning at your best. And trust in personal life, interesting, comes in here. So these are the 5 interesting top behaviors and states in the code that in the 2,500 people correlated best and also had the best causality effect on the learning capacity of this group. I find that quite fascinating and somewhat surprising. The resilience one is quite easier, and I think you've been through this with me before, or I've been with you, but let me just explain, let's repeat again. These are the top 5 ones: optimism, reducing negative thought patterns. Remember, we talked about these, they're so important to build resilience. And this speaks, of course, to a mindset as well, and to be able to overcome your challenges and to see that you overcome your challenges, to move back into a baseline relaxed physiological state, and to be able to overcome bigger and bigger challenges. You need these 2. Using the generic parts technique is a technique of problem solving, speaks to innovation, a sense of meaningfulness at work provides us with social safety, as does your trust when you speak about learning capacity. A sense of meaningfulness at work, very important to build resilience, to move us into a baseline relaxed physiological state, and then intermittent fasting to switch off the inflammatory process, which that does. So intermittent fasting also very strong correlative effect really on the resilience. And so these are interesting what we find from this code, from the behavioral code for learning capacity and for resilience. If I have confused you, I think what is important is that we have findings and then we have science that has been studied. I think the findings are extremely compelling because of the size, the mere size, and we will continue to try to find reasons, compelling reasons for why these are more important than, for example, high-intensity interval training when it comes to learning capacity. One of the things that I do have to admit is that what we do here is we are actually studying a very particular outcome, as opposed to, and one outcome is can never be separated from other outcomes when you think about a complex system. And so the more you look at a complex system, for example, at a high performance index, and not only at some of these components, and you pivot all the behaviors around that, I think that's more sensible to do. And so in time, we will probably just provide a high performance index and say, in there is resilience, in there's learning capacity, and that it makes up this particular index, and these are the things that you have to pay attention to in particular. I think that's what we're going to do in one of the next masterclasses, that I will show you how that all pivots to one particular bow-tie outcome. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you for a few thoughts. I have run out of time, really, so if there are any thoughts, please just put your thoughts in your, let me just stop sharing, and please just do it in the chat box. So I'm going to open the chat box. If there are any thoughts, you're welcome. For those of you who have to go, dinner is calling in South Africa, and I'm sure there's quite a few things that need to be done in the US still today, so have a wonderful Thursday. Any thoughts, please, I'm happy to stay on for a while, and ready to discuss this with you for those of you who can remain. Thank you very much. Great. There are a few questions. How do you see cognitive flexibility and cognitive rigidity being influenced? Janet, yes. So the idea of cognitive flexibility speaks to the capacity of the executive function, this prefrontal cortex, our cortical function, to move our attention set from one particular point to another, and how fast we can do that, and to what extent we can focus our attention on that is really important. And in fact, that is also being affected by these brain training games. So I think that probably settles that. So it speaks in our study very much to the idea of learning capacity. So it enhances our capacity for learning to practice that in particular as well. Then Peter, great to see you. Yes, great to see you here, and actually all of you. So many names. As a coach, one is dealing with mindsets where the learning experience has led to a dysfunctionality, almost like being infected with a virus, usually fear. It is so beneficial to understand how this comes about, the antidote and tools to be. Yeah, great comment, Peter. Learning has become a fear factor in many ways. Learning as such, to this point, just to agree with you, is that learning as a construct very often follow crisis. It follows the crisis where fear response leads to a particular crisis, and change is inevitable and necessary, and then we learn from those experiences. And I think learning as a real reward for building resilience and ensuring that we have got a great capacity for upskilling and to ensure that we do not implode in life has got an interesting slant to it. You know, it's got an interesting sound to it that I think we might want to emphasize to our teachers who work with learners out there. That's just another thought on my side, Peter. Thank you very much. Are you referring to finding a tiger in a room where there's no? Oh, you mean the fear of? Okay, mindset. Oh, you're speaking to mindset, Peter. Yeah, I think you're talking to a mindset. Yeah, you're talking to a mindset, learning from it. Yes. Yeah, I'm with you. I think the experience then has led to a particular way of value assigning particular value, assigning value to an incoming cue that is exaggerated. Is that right? Is that what you refer to? So I've seen it. I now have a particular, what we call a mindset that needs to be reframed. If that is exaggeratedly abnormal, we need psychotherapy for that, of course, and even CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, etc. As coaches, not being a coach myself, I know that you work with a very different methodology to support individuals to achieve their goals. I think that's a very difficult one, but by and large, mindset. If one can really ask the right questions to your coaches to understand mindset and what is important and what is more important and what is less important, and to tease out how that mindset has been reframed because of experiences might be very useful for a reframing. Thank you very much for your contribution, Peter. I agree with you fully. And then Warren, interesting that sales had a low learning capacity but were top job performance. Yes, very interesting. Warren, I'm not going to make a comment and then eventually make a silly one. We'll have to figure out why that is. In fact, I think we're going to have to. We'll probably in time do a very deep analysis on this particular study and then publish it properly. And then we will try to infer all of these patterns and explain why they are the way they are. And of course, throw out some outliers. Although in 2,500, you probably have already have a very strong significance to everything that you find. Thank you for that. And then Shelley, I'm doing a resilience workshop and using the Neurozone team effective support. I thought it was very interesting, although the whole team needed to increase science of the mind as their top high recommendation, and yet science of the mind was not top. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? So, I think when it comes to team effectiveness, just on that note, Shelley, it depends on what the choice was for team effectiveness. We now have a system where we basically provide what we call a menu of outcomes, and resilience would be one of them. And so depending on the scores there, we would probably go for the lowest score. That could, for example, be job performance, or it could be clinic visits. And then upon that lowest score, then you'll probably find that the individual behaviors now start to correlate with that lower score because it is so intertwined. And I think that's a more sensible process, actually a more sensible way to go about this. So even though you are building resilience as a team, if individuals have a particular way of their own brain-body system scores, it will relate to another risk that's somewhere in there that wasn't resilient itself. And so we're now actually trying to actually fit them together. I hope that makes sense to you. Shelley, I'm trying to understand. It was not recommended in their team report to develop the core competence of resilience. It was resilience. Yeah, I think if I understand you correct, Shelley, that that in your resilience workshop you use resilience as the outcome. So we gave you a resilience team effectiveness report, and you had to work on resilience, whereas the individuals would probably have scored lower on other outcomes, which would then require silence in the mind in that as well. So that, I think that's probably why. Yes. So as I said, now we have a whole different way of doing the team effectiveness solution. So if for all of you are actually working with teams and enhancing team effectiveness, the team effectiveness analytics are now run in a way that you look at all the outcomes. There are about 7 outcomes that are provided with scores, and then the team makes the choice of which one they want to work on, and then usually that is the lowest score. But if they don't, then there might be this discrepancy between what they as individuals need to work on and what they as a team need to work on in terms of the particular behaviors and states that they need to enhance. I hope that makes sense. Because it all comes from the same questionnaire or the same assessment. And so, yeah, Shelley, I think this is a very important point that you make, and thank you very much for that. I think we've clarified this now, and for the future, as I said, we'll work on the choice from the team. And with that, I think we have to say goodbye to everybody. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and thank you very much for staying on a bit longer. And we'll see you next month with our next masterclass.